Anthony Lane is here in 1993. He became the film critic for the New Yorker magazine. Laura Miller wrote in the New York Times that Lane writes prose the way Fred Astaire danced. His new book is called Nobody's Perfect. It is a collection of his writings on film, books, and other topics. I am pleased to have him at this table. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
The title comes from Some Like It Hot, doesn't it?
Of course. It's the final line of Some Like It Hot. You know, Jerry Brown, Jet Lemon in the boat, and they sort of finally, damn it all, Osgood, I'm a man. He said, nobody's perfect, you know.
Having dressed as a woman all those
absolutely, all this while. And it struck me, not only have I got a piece about Billy Wilder in the book, which was a tribute to him, having this as the title, but also it became, as it were, the subject of the book the more I thought about it. The book is, as it were, the book is about the avoidance of tragedy, in a sense. It's about the fact that, you know, the fact that comedy is, it's a book devoted, in a sense, to comedy and to the way that movies and other things celebrate our imperfections.
All right,
it's all about, you know, if a fat guy falls over in the street, it's not funny. If a fat guy in the street falls over in film, it's very funny. And yeah, that's where that's where the book starts, really.
Okay. Nobody's perfect. Let me just take a look at the cover here. This is Shakespeare,
Buster Keaton. This is Shackleton's, this is called Shackleton's ship down to the South
Pole. The ice there.
This is Godzilla, and then best of all we have Julia Roberts and next to T.S. Eliot. Now this is a meeting I would very much like to have been present at. You know, imagine the two of them. This is the opposite. Whatever fireworks may consist of, this is the opposite. This is damp squibs together. But he's looking at her in that way, which thinks, you know, what? Not just who is this, but what is this? You know, I felt if 5 minutes with him, you know, and we would never have had the poetry. You know, she would have saved. You know, she would have saved us so much bother, really.
Anthony Lane has energy, wit, taste, learning, and most signally, elegance of mind, says Martin Amis. That's almost what he said about Christopher Hitchens, isn't it?
Yeah. That's an interesting spat, isn't it? It's London still goes in for these major feuds between writers. I myself have never, to my great shame and discredit, I don't seem to have entered into any major feuds yet, but that's a good one. And it's about an important subject, you know. Amos and Hitchens are...
Hitler and Stalin is what it's
Hitler
about.
And Stalin, there's no bigger subjects. And I think it will run. And to their credit, they say they remain friends. And that they can have these intellectual differences, which in itself is quite educational, I think.
You don't have that in the United States. I don't know a great feud among people of that intellect.
Yeah, and even the Nabokov-Wilson thing a long time ago became, in the end, a breakage of a friendship when they broke over Nabokov's translation of Pushkin. And I notice if you venture an opinion that happens to offend someone's taste, if someone's in the business themselves, they're in the media, they're used to kind of jostling opinions around, throwing opinions into the pot, it's fine. But if they're not, if they're kind of an ordinary reader in some ways, and you venture an opinion that offends their taste, they will take it very much to heart, as if their taste is something they clutch to themselves, and that to disagree with them is somehow to offend them personally. There was a time when you would watch the great movies, and movies made life worth living, you know, whether you're watching a Jean Renoir movie, or whether you're watching a great screwball comedy, you came out, you felt, you know, you were gunning for action, you know, life felt better as a direct result. And now I get the feeling that movies are sort of... even amongst the very good filmmakers still operating today, it's like life makes movies worth living.
Well, you make this point that's interesting in this book. If you look at Ridley Scott, who made Black Hawk Down, and you look at Ridley Scott, who made that early movie, Alien, and you suggest that there's no progress.
No, well, if anything, there's a decline. I mean, I enjoyed Black Hawk Down, but all I think it was extremely... more violent perhaps than it needed to be, but it felt very frantic. I know the subject is frantic, but that's no reason to make a frantic work of art about it all. It's possible to make a very calm work of art about a very frantic subject. But it feels that, I don't know whether this is his choice or whether there are pressures now coming from the studios, but everything is very hasty, there's no downtime. If you think about Alien, all the downtime, all the kind of, you know, the long lunch before John Hurt explodes, you know, these are the things, or Sigourney Weaver moving around the craft very slowly. The build-up was so strong. You hardly saw the monster at all. The guy who'd created the monster complained to Scott. He said, look, you don't see enough of my monster. And Scott said, exactly. You know, it's the old haunted house thing. And I do feel that, in a way, it goes beyond this. If you look at a director like Scorsese, if the great American directors now, you know, Scorsese and Woody Allen and Tarantino, who's younger and so forth, if we knew who he was, there is that slight sort of hothouse air to their movies, you know, that they have decided that movies are a better place to live than real life. When I watched Taxi Driver or I watched Annie Hall, I genuinely felt there was fresh air coming in, you know, there was life, you know, not just because they go to the planetarium at Annie Hall and so forth and make, you know, intergalactic love on the lunar surface, as Woody says. But, I mean, you felt that these were people who had lives that were feeding back into the films. And now I watched a Scorsese movie. I haven't seen the new one yet. I'm very much looking forward to it. But it's
Gangs
as if
of New York.
Gangs of New York. But his last few films, they're wonderful and, I mean, brilliant in every conceivable technical way. But they feel as if his idea of suffering, as Woody Allen's idea of comedy, is being learnt from films now, and from old films, and from his own experiences on film.
Saying that you think Woody has not made the kind of films he used to make.
I want to say to him, get out on the street, get a life slightly, because I feel it's not as if he's reporting back from the front lines of experience, be they the front lines of the sex war, or in Scorsese's case, from the front lines of, if you watch
Urban Living,
or people living, and if you watch Bringing Out the Dead, which was Scorsese's last movie about medics and so forth. It could have been set in New York in 1970. He wants to think it's still a hellhole.
Okay, but let me turn then and say, I mean, those are good. To read you is to believe that you think they have not been doing their best work.
Well, no, I think that's true. On the other hand, who are we to complain? My wife said to me, stop complaining. She said, look, I know, Francis Ford Coppola hasn't produced anything, but look, he made The Godfather, he made The Conversation, he made Apocalypse Now. That's not bad for a life. Not everybody can be Rembrandt, okay? Not everybody can have the great spirited youth and the great old wintry age.
Speaking of directors then, if you want to give the highest marks to someone who has over the period of time consistently set a high standard, does Steven Spielberg reach that? Well, more than anyone else?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, isn't that odd? He somehow still feels like a young man. I know he's middle-aged now, but I mean, he has that great gift which Robert Altman also has, and it's a matter of it's good luck for everything else. We kind of forget the glitches in Spielberg. We forget Always and Hook and things. We remember the big movies, the big successes, and AI was this great, fascinating failure. I think some people loved it. I didn't get it at all. It came alive in only very perfunctory ways,
and it should have been masterful because it's a subject that he clearly had great passion for.
Whereas I thought Minority Report was a good, fun genre movie. I thought, yeah, he's back, he's firing again, And there were those little moments. He can do the, the funny / scary thing better than anybody else still. And who knows what he'll do in old age? If you ever, I can't imagine Spielberg being old. I sort of feel he'll be kind of this perpetual boy wonder. And he's, he made the great films about
all of the curiosity and all of the enthusiasm of his youth.
Absolutely, that will never go. Plainly, that will never go.
Let me take you back to 1993. So Tina Brown is then the editor of New Yorker magazine. She wants to hire you. She invites you to lunch. She's going to hire you as the film critic for the New Yorker. What was your charge? What did she say? I want you to do.
Well, in a sense, it's a simple job, in that it has a regular beat, and I couldn't do a job that doesn't have a regular beat. I have to have the ground base, and the ground base is you see a movie.
So you couldn't be Adam Gopnik. You couldn't just go off in search of a subject that you want to write about.
I can't do carte blanche. I couldn't do what Adam does.
Now, why couldn't you?
I envy him more than I can say for this ability. I have to be given an absolute task, and I go for it on deadline. And I do a movie review every other week with David Denby. Going alternate weeks, and then in my off weeks I write about books or photography or things. Those, to an extent, I slightly choose. I'm a complete ambulance chaser. If someone dies or it's their 100th anniversary, I'll say, hey, Hitchcock was born 100 years ago. Let's have a big Hitchcock piece, Because the second half of the book is books and so forth, and pieces about directors. People who are beyond the reach of fashion. Movies are very hot. They're conceived in heat, they're sold in heat, they're watched in this kind of great warm, spirited place, and people could chatter about them all the time, even before they've seen them. And then the people in the second half of the book, whatever you say about T.S. Eliot, he's not hot, He was cold when he was alive, and he's colder now. And that seems to me, it's like a salve, it's like a refuge from movies, to go into these, these calm artists, the stand-back guys,
Look at the great critics, film critics, or even literary critics. People who not only reviewed, but also wrote essays about the nature of the particular art form.
Yeah.
In film, it's certainly Pauline Kael is of top rank.
Of course. I mean,
who else?
Apart from Pauline, who, in his footsteps, I was like
the dean of, so to speak.
There's a guy called David Thompson, who's a wonderful writer, who has a book called The Biographical Dictionary of Film, and in fact, there's a new edition out right now, and that was a revelation to me reading that, because there was a famous moment when I was reading that, and it said, Cary Grant is the best and most important actor in the history of cinema. I thought, Oh. Well, I know I love Cary Grant, and I've sort of seen the movies, and I watch them, but, you know, shouldn't I be thinking about Brando, or, you know, Charles Lawton?
Or whoever, yeah.
And I suddenly thought, oh, yeah, you can think that the guy you love watching, like, on a, you know, rainy Tuesday night with a bucket of ice cream is the best guy, you know. It's okay to think this. And the fact that a film is 3 hours long and, you know, set in Russia doesn't make it per se a more interesting film. In fact, you know, the light comedy made in 1939 could be the real thing, and that was a revelation to me, and it turned me around when I first read that. And now I do think, not only do I think Bringing Up Baby is, you know, a fun, you know, it remains a great fun piece of work and a great entertainment, it happens to be one of the best, you know, it's one of the best reports filed on, you know, the battle between men and women, between this almost, you know, this almost Shakespearean lunacy that Katharine Hepburn goes into. And the way in which those movies of that era, women ran rings around the men. Barbara Stanwyck ran rings around Henry Fonda.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
You know, Hepburn ran rings like Cary Grant. She ran running around Cary Grant. You know, and this has there ever been a greater, you know, demonstration of womanly power? And these, when we go back to them now, they were Saturday night movies.
All right, let me, you know, Pauline Kael and Thompson, what do they have? I mean, is it the sort of the capacity to look at movies with through a certain prism that makes movies, they see it clearer, they see it in a way, and are able to express that in prose that's compelling?
If there is a prism, it's a prism that brings all the beams of light together, because both of them are interested in not just in movies, but in books and art, and
so they see movies in the context of the world,
and life comes in and is channeled into the movies, you know. And I feel that's very, very important. And also, neither of them do I read primarily for the substance of their verdicts. You know, I don't go, oh well, David doesn't like this film, therefore I'm not going to go, or Pauline loved that film, therefore I must go. That's interesting, and it's, you know, it's very much something that they would want you to disagree with them on or agree with them on. But something I've tried to argue myself is that, you know, the idea that we go to movie critics purely to tell us whether to see a movie or not, for their verdict, this is
so
this
the
is such
idea
a paltry
of thumbs up
thing.
and thumbs down doesn't
I think
appeal
film
to you.
critics should have thumbs surgically removed. Okay, when the moment you get the job, if you really can't do anything else, become a movie critic, tell them taken away, and just stop that, you know, and because it's not your job. Your job is to tell you, and tell your reader what kind of sensory experience he or she is going to have. What's it like in there? It's like coming back from a holiday.
Yeah. Have you written a review of a movie that had some staying power and come back and saw it a year later, or 2 years later, or 5 years later and said, I was dead wrong? I say that because it is my understanding from this that you believe you ought to write the movie within a day of seeing. You ought to write the criticism within a day of seeing the movie.
You should get going and say what you think, yeah. I'm not sure if I would absolutely recant on any of these things, nor that I wouldn't go to the stake on any of them either, but I would...
You would.
I think something like LA Confidential, for instance, which is a very good movie, very smart and swift and sure and well-paced and, you know, much better than the stuff around it. But I remember Dave Remnick, the editor of The New Yorker, saying to me about 2 weeks later, Anthony, it's good, but it's not Chinatown, you know. And it may be that sometimes when
did you say that?
No, I didn't, but I mean, I think most of us probably went a little bit overboard because the surrounding stuff was so weak, you know, that we thought, this is it, this is the great thing. In fact, you know, let's, and 10 years later, and you have to wait, you know, time has to settle on these things. You think, it's great, but it doesn't have that amazing, you know, luminous feeling that Chinatown does. It doesn't feel like a tragedy in the way Chinatown does. It's a very, very good thriller. Whereas Chinatown, you look back on, and it feels like not only does it define the era it's set in, it defines the era it was made. It defines the era in which Pauline Kael was writing about it. And then when John Huston sits down in that movie, you know, with lunch, talk about, that's what I mean by life coming in, okay? Yeah. John Huston is, he's a man of the world. The world is in that movie. Polanski knew about, you know, suffering, revenge. There was no world more closed than film noir, and yet within that movie, we feel we're learning, you know, so much about not just the history of Los Angeles, and we're feeling about, you know, the incestuous nature of families and family love. I mean, the movie gets better and better and better. How many movies we're seeing now will get better and better and better in the way that Citizen Kane does in Chinatown?
Well said.
I don't know. Don't ask me to predict, because I'll be wrong.
I've always wanted to spend one summer in which I would watch all of the film adaptations of the best works of Shakespeare. I'd go find the best 3 Hamlets.
There's a big piece about Shakespeare in a film in there.
Yeah.
There was reportedly a 10-minute silent Hamlet from 1905, which I've always wanted to see. I happen to think the Orson Welles Othello is a very great film.
Yeah.
It's chopped to shreds. You can't hear half of it. It was cut all over the place. They filmed it in different countries. You know, the Desdemona isn't very great. Yeah. But something about it just gets you into the play. It has a fantastic Iago, and the scenes in Venice have that lovely sort of silvery quality. And I think if Shakespeare had seen it, he would have, you know, called his agent and said, "Who is this Wells guy? I want him now," you know. And that's the pleasure of finding that. If I was teaching Shakespeare now, I would take them to that. I wouldn't take them to one of the more very, very faithful ones, you know, which has all the text, you know. Yeah. I would take them to...
I never saw, and I've been waiting on it to see it on
Brown
DVD.
Othello,
Yeah,
Brown Hamlet, you know.
Yeah, that's right, 5 hours.
It is kind of amazing, and I think, and I admire him for doing it.
It's a total text film.
Yeah. And it, you know, and it does flow extremely well, and it's, in a way, he shames many directors who think that Shakespeare is theirs for the hacking. It's the opposite of the Wells approach. Both have their, you know, both have their
Here's
great
what I've
values.
understood about acting. Most good actors I've known who've sat at this table, and many of them have said to me, Hamlet is easy compared with Macbeth. That Macbeth is just, you know, very few people have ever done a great Macbeth.
No. I've heard great Macbeths on the radio, oddly enough. It's a great sound play. It's a great sound play. And you can get, you know, all the great, you know, actors doing these things. But, no, Hamlet is, you know, there's all the other great parts around you in Hamlet as well. Macbeth, you're kind of, apart from Lady Macbeth, you're out there on your own, you know. And I think it's the kind of exposure.
So what's second best to you from Hamlet? Is it Richard III, or is it Henry V, or what?
My favourite play is Anti-Cleopatra, which I think is unfilmable. Charlton Heston once tried. Charlton Heston tried, but you know, I think it is a very great play. Whether it truly counts as a tragedy, I don't know. I think the great film which should be made is Troilus and Cressida. You know, it's a great movie, and you could set it in Vietnam, or you could set it in the Civil War. It's about, you know, politically it's as acerbic as ever. There's a kind of dreadful love story that is kind of cut off at the knees. But it would need Scorsese, or it would need Michael Mann, you know, and it would need about $200 million, because it's the Trojan War here, guys.
Set in Miami Beach, or
yeah, exactly. So yeah. Why not? No,
about the drug traffic.
Yeah, it's no. I think it would be a Civil War Troilus and Cressida, perfectly possible for many reasons. But you know, so that's a pitch if anybody's out there. Right. You know,
Anthony Lane, Nobody's Perfect. Writings from the New Yorker, as I said, reviews, musings, and other things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.